The air was cold, thin, and sharp as the roar of engines filled the vacuum of space. A fleet of military rovers descended, cutting through the lunar dust like predators hunting prey. The mission was clear: breach the base, secure the defenses, and survive. But nothing ever goes as planned when lives hang by the thread of a trigger pull. Carlos gripped the turret, his hands steady, eyes scanning for targets amidst the chaos. Samantha's voice crackled, sharp and urgent, as the rover surged over craters and debris. The sound of bullets and explosions came without warning, their destination drawing closer. Then, in a single, brutal instant, everything changed. Carlos's body crumpled, unresponsive, blood bubbling at the edge of his helmet. Fear gripped them all as they raced toward their uncertain fate, knowing time was slipping away. The mission was clear, though fraught with danger. The objective was to advance toward a Killian installation, a strategically vital target that held planetary defense systems. These systems, if successfully seized, would give their side access to powerful space-based weapons capable of shifting the tide of the ongoing battle. This was no simple task, as the installation was well defended, and the team had to penetrate enemy lines to disable their defenses. Success would not only ensure their survival but also grant a tactical advantage over the enemy by neutralizing their ability to fight back effectively. The team was equipped with advanced gear and combat vehicles, including a heavily armored rover. This vehicle had been outfitted with a variety of countermeasures meant to absorb incoming fire and neutralize missile threats, but the risks remained. The journey toward their destination would be dangerous, with enemy fire and ambushes a constant threat. Each step in this mission would rely on careful coordination, technological support, and their own individual courage. The team knew that survival would depend on discipline, strategy, and speed. Savin, one of the key members of the team, was given the role of loader for the main gun on the rover. His responsibilities were straightforward but vital, keeping the gun supplied with ammunition while maintaining focus in the heat of battle. While Savin wasn't a frequent user of such ground-based vehicles, his confidence in his ability to manage the task was solid. This role was crucial as it would ensure that the gun continued to suppress enemy positions and maintain the team's tactical edge during their advance toward the installation. The group's strategy involved reaching the Killian installation as quickly as possible while relying on coordinated firepower and vehicle support to neutralize enemy threats. The humans had brought experience and tactical precision to the team, with Carlos focusing on offensive suppression and Samantha ensuring the rover stayed on course. Their technological edge, combined with their combat skills, would hopefully allow them to endure the intense enemy pressure they expected to encounter. Despite their confidence, the dangers of this mission loomed large. The team knew that any misstep could result in catastrophic failure. As they pushed forward, the weight of their mission lingered in every decision. Gaining control of the planetary defense systems was more than just a tactical goal. It symbolized hope and a brighter chance for survival. These weapons could change the course of their battle against the enemy by allowing them to counter enemy fire and neutralize advanced spacecraft threats. Yet every step toward their goal felt like a calculated risk. The dangers were everywhere, but the team remained committed to the mission, each member leaning on their experience and trust in one another as they charged forward into uncertainty. Savin was under pressure as he adjusted himself to the demands of the mission. His role as the loader was vital to the team's success, as the ability to maintain a constant supply of ammunition to the main gun on the rover would ensure their offensive capability throughout their journey. While Savin wasn't fully accustomed to operating or handling such vehicles, his confidence stemmed from prior experiences during raids and military operations. Despite the unfamiliarity of the terrain and the environment, Savin felt capable, aware that his efforts would directly contribute to the team's ability to reach their objective and overcome enemy fire. The rover itself was a technological marvel, equipped with advanced countermeasures, heavy armor, and reliable weaponry. However, the presence of enemy fire could not be ignored. Every burst of energy from the Killian defense systems could spell trouble, and the team knew that speed and coordination would be their best defense. The humans in the group had shown expertise and tactical awareness as they fired rounds at enemy positions, keeping enemy threats suppressed while steadily advancing. Savin focused on his role without hesitating, prioritizing his duty to ensure that the gun remained fully operational. His claws worked efficiently, transferring rounds and managing supplies as the rover pressed on through the lunar terrain. The ride itself was perilous. The group knew that their approach would likely make them a visible target to Killian defenders and their advanced weapon systems. There was no time to hesitate or second-guess decisions, especially as enemy fire became heavier with each passing minute. While Samantha focused on driving with a steady hand, expertly navigating the rover toward its destination, Carlos kept the pressure on the enemy with sharp bursts of fire from the mounted gun. Despite the technological advantages of their vehicle and the careful planning of their strategy, the dangers of enemy ambushes and missile attacks loomed heavily. The lack of visibility was also a challenge. Space combat and planetary firefights relied heavily on situational awareness, and yet, the team found themselves often in the dark due to the nature of stealth, sudden attacks, and a lack of immediate warning. This forced Savin to focus not only on his task but on maintaining his composure under intense stress. He knew that letting fear or panic take control could lead to failure or disaster. Trusting in the humans' technology and their shared experience, Savin pressed forward, determined to ensure his team's survival while pushing toward the planetary defense complex. The further they pushed into enemy territory, the closer they came to their goal. The presence of constant fire and threats intensified, yet the group held their focus, knowing that the stakes were far higher than survival alone. Gaining control of the Killian installation meant more than victory. It meant gaining a foothold for their fleet and ensuring the survival of countless lives. Savin continued to focus on his role, his hands steady as they moved the ammunition with precise speed. His mental focus never wavered, knowing that in this high-pressure moment, his performance could mean the difference between life and death for the team. The team's journey through the lunar terrain felt like a mix of tense urgency and calculated determination. As they sped toward the Killian installation on the surface, the rover's machine gun continued to fire bursts at enemy positions while the vehicle itself remained a heavily armored, reliable force. Savin focused on his task, reloading the main gun with practiced speed and precision, his sharp claws working as efficiently as possible. Despite being under constant fire, his confidence remained steady, and his trust in the human crew's experience kept him grounded. Their combined efforts demonstrated discipline and strategy as they moved through the rough lunar terrain toward their destination. The atmosphere inside the rover was tense but professional. Samantha drove with the kind of focus and confidence that came from years of experience navigating hostile terrain. Her ability to maintain control over the vehicle under heavy enemy fire gave the team confidence that they could complete their mission. Meanwhile, Carlos operated the mounted gun with a deadly precision that suppressed enemy resistance as they made their approach. Savin, though still unfamiliar with the full scope of the rover's use and its specialized technology, felt his role as the loader become second nature with each passing moment. The seamless communication between the crew members was vital, and they shared no distractions as they maintained their focus on the task at hand. The journey itself came with its own challenges. Enemy fire intensified as they got closer to their target, and Savin could feel the weight of each passing second. The Killian defense systems were active and persistent, sending missile fire and kinetic energy blasts in their direction. Despite their technological superiority, it was clear that every moment of their approach would demand steady nerves and efficient responses. The rover's countermeasures were impressive, designed to neutralize incoming missiles and kinetic threats, but Savin knew there would always be danger until they reached their objective. He could feel his heart pounding as the rover raced across the cratered lunar surface, and yet he kept his focus, knowing that hesitation would compromise their chances of survival. The humans demonstrated remarkable skill as they worked together under fire. Samantha's expertise in driving the vehicle and Carlos's sharpshooting kept them alive as they pushed forward, while Savin focused on ensuring the gun remained ready and supplied. The teamwork was a testament to their experience and planning. As each moment passed, Savin reminded himself of their ultimate objective: to reach the Killian installation, gain control, and disable its planetary defenses. While fear could have gripped him under the weight of the enemy's constant presence and attacks, He chose to rely on their strategy and preparation to guide them. Savin could feel the heat of the gunfire and the vibrations from the weapon as they rolled forward, each burst a reminder of the pressure they were under. His thoughts remained on their mission and their strategy, even as the physical exertion of loading rounds and bracing himself against the rover's movements wore on him. Every step forward felt like a small victory, a small assurance that they would reach their goal. The lunar terrain was unpredictable, filled with craters and ridges, and yet the rover plowed through it with mechanical grace, aided by its superior engineering. Savin reminded himself to stay strong, his determination matching that of his human companions. They were close now, but the fight was far from over. The mission was proving both exhilarating and terrifying as they advanced toward the Killian installation, their progress marked by steady bursts of gunfire and the hum of machinery. Savin remained focused on his assigned task, his claws swiftly and accurately loading rounds into the main gun, while the vehicle sped across the lunar surface under fire. The experience was foreign to him, working with this kind of ground-based warfare equipment, but his instincts and training kept him efficient. The cold, calculated rhythm of reloading felt oddly comforting amidst the chaos, a reminder that they still had control over at least part of their situation. Despite this, the constant presence of enemy fire gnawed at him. Carlos maintained his position at the mounted machine gun, sending controlled bursts of fire into enemy forces that had gathered along their path. His movements were confident, deliberate, and efficient, a sharp contrast to the chaotic environment they were racing through. Savin could see Carlos's focused expression through the small viewport of his helmet, his every action demonstrating experience and composure even under fire. Samantha, meanwhile, had her hands firmly on the rover's controls as she expertly navigated through craters and over uneven lunar terrain. The vehicle's steady rumble and motion under her command reminded Savin of how well-prepared and resourceful the humans were in combat situations. The rover itself was a marvel of design and engineering, with inbuilt systems that dampened the effects of incoming enemy fire and countered missile threats. Savin marveled at how the machine could absorb or neutralize kinetic blasts, a testament to the technological supremacy of the humans and their military resources. Yet even with this support, the journey toward the installation was far from smooth. Each burst of enemy fire, each missile launched from a distant vantage point, was a stark reminder of how vulnerable they remained. Savin knew that every mile they gained brought them closer to their goal, but the pressure of having to rely on technology and skill kept his mind sharp. As the rover continued its advance, the atmosphere grew heavier with every passing moment. The enemy had focused their attention on them, and the fire from enemy installations seemed to intensify as they approached the Killian defenses. Savin found himself gripping the gun as he loaded another round, his fingers trembling slightly under the pressure. His thoughts were uncertain. He could feel the weight of his role in this mission, knowing that failure would mean death, both for himself and his human companions. This fear, however, was buried beneath his sense of purpose and his trust in their preparation and skill. He chose to focus on the task at hand, trying to block out the chaos and instead think of each small movement as part of the larger plan. The sounds of gunfire, both from their side and from the enemy, were constant as they drove forward. Every time the rover's wheels churned over rock and dust, Savin's determination grew. His breaths came heavily in his suit as he pressed forward, ignoring the way his muscles ached and his body strained under pressure. The human's confidence was contagious, and he could feel himself drawing strength from it. Despite the terrifying odds, despite the uncertainty of whether they would make it to the installation, Savin resolved to stay strong and maintain his focus. His role felt simple, but vital: ensure that the weapon was always supplied and ready, and trust that the humans would carry out the rest of the mission with their typical skill and bravery. As they neared the Killian installation, Savin could feel the heat of enemy fire in the air, even though the lunar atmosphere lacked oxygen to carry sound. His sense of unease lingered, but it was matched by his resolve. Every second brought them closer to the installation, and the tension in the air was palpable. Despite the confusion of enemy blasts, the hum of their weapon systems, and the shifting lunar terrain, Savin continued to move with mechanical precision. His body ached, his vision was blurred by the constant motion, but he knew that this was not the time for weakness. They had come this far, and they couldn't falter now. With every round he loaded and every second he stayed focused, Savin felt himself drawing closer to the goal, driven by sheer will and the knowledge that their success could turn the tide of the war. The journey toward the Killian installation was fraught with obstacles and the constant pressure of enemy fire. As they advanced, Carlos remained steady at the machine gun, his bursts of fire precise and well-timed. His calm demeanor stood out against the backdrop of explosions and chaos. Samantha drove the rover skillfully, navigating the treacherous lunar terrain with a sense of expertise that only came from experience. The steady rumble of the rover's engine and the controlled vibrations of its propulsion system gave the crew hope, even amidst the disorienting chaos of battle. Savin focused on his role of loading ammunition with practiced precision, his hands steady despite the burning tension in his chest. The lunar surface seemed alive with movement as enemy fire danced across the sky in bright flashes. From the viewpoint of the rover, explosions erupted and smoke trails streaked upward, proof of the desperate efforts of the enemy to halt their advance. Despite the technological advantages of their vehicle, equipped with missile countermeasures and reinforced armor, Savin could still feel the strain of being in such a vulnerable position. Every passing second brought the distant thuds of enemy ordnance, and he could sense the weight of their mission as it grew closer. His role, though seemingly small, was crucial, to ensure that the gun remained fully loaded and that their firepower would stay ready to engage hostile targets. The journey had its share of terrifying moments, but amidst the chaos, Savin tried to remain focused on the task at hand. He could see Carlos firing, each burst creating a sharp contrast between the icy lunar surface and the bright flares of energy being launched in return. Samantha kept her focus firmly on the path ahead, her hands gripping the controls as she adjusted their trajectory to avoid craters and sudden hazards. The teamwork was seamless, a reflection of years of experience and trust built among soldiers under pressure. Every part of their preparation, every maneuver of the vehicle, and every burst of fire was part of a greater strategy. Savin knew that if they were to succeed in taking the installation, they would have to rely on this unity. The internal mechanisms of the rover were remarkable, equipped with advanced systems that provided countermeasures against incoming missile fire and could absorb or deflect attacks with ease. Savin marveled at how well the technology worked, though his sense of unease never fully left him. The idea that they were exposed and vulnerable to so many enemies while relying on machines and human skill brought its own brand of stress. Despite his fears, Savin forced himself to focus, maintaining the rhythm of his actions, ensuring that every round was properly loaded into the gun, ready for the next burst. His body ached under the pressure, and his breathing came in sharp bursts, but he forced himself to remain steady. As they closed the distance to the Killian installation, the air felt heavier, the pressure mounting with every passing second. The sound of the gunfire, combined with the vibrations of the rover and the motion of the terrain, created a sense of disorientation. Despite this, Savin focused on the certainty of their plan, knowing that they would soon breach the installation's defenses. The sense of hope and fear mixed within him as his mind raced through every detail of their strategy. The humans were confident, disciplined, and determined, and he found strength in their presence. Their skill and bravery provided him the encouragement to push through his fears and focus on his role as a loader. The battle remained chaotic as they advanced, the terrain shifting and enemy fire growing heavier. Despite the advancements of technology and the confidence of their combined forces, the danger was real and omnipresent. Savin continued his work, the steady loading of ammunition into the gun feeling both mechanical and meaningful. His mind stayed on the task, unwilling to allow fear or uncertainty to win. His trust in his companions and their preparation gave him strength, even as the battle raged on. The sense that they were making progress, moving closer to their goal, kept him grounded as they raced toward the Killian installation, uncertain of what awaited them but determined to see the mission through. The situation grew more tense as the rover pressed onward toward the Killian installation. The sound of explosions, bursts of fire, and the relentless pull of enemy ordnance grew louder with each passing moment. Carlos maintained his position at the turret, firing with unwavering precision, while Samantha remained focused on driving through the unpredictable lunar landscape. Her hands gripped the controls tightly as she expertly navigated the uneven surface, avoiding craters and rocks that threatened to stall their vehicle. Savin stayed at his task of loading rounds into the gun, his hands steady despite the strain of the journey. The teamwork was flawless, but the uncertainty of their mission lingered heavily over all of them. The enemy fire was unpredictable, coming from various angles as they raced toward the installation. There was no telling how close they were to hitting their destination, nor whether the snipers stationed on the base's perimeter had succeeded in eliminating the key holders responsible for the self-destruct mechanism. These were the constant thoughts running through Savin's mind as he worked. His breaths came quickly as his hands moved, each round loaded into the machine gun feeling like a small victory against the uncertainty that surrounded them. Every burst of fire from Carlos felt reassuring, even as the enemy tried to pin them down with their own bursts of kinetic energy. The rover's advanced technology offered some peace of mind. Its countermeasures and armored hull acted as a shield between them and the worst of the enemy's firepower. The vehicle appeared sturdy enough to withstand the onslaught, with missile defense systems actively neutralizing incoming threats in flight. Despite these protections, Savin could not shake the growing anxiety. Every new burst of enemy fire and sudden explosion brought a fresh reminder of how exposed they truly were. His focus remained resolute, though. The task at hand had to come before fear. He kept his rhythm steady, and his hands stayed constant, ensuring the gun stayed supplied with ammunition. As they continued through the lunar landscape, Savin could feel his own exhaustion begin to catch up with him. His core burned from the physical effort of maintaining his role, while his mind struggled to stay sharp amid the chaos. Every few minutes, a new burst of enemy fire would test the vehicle's defenses, and Carlos would respond with calculated bursts from the turret. Savin admired the humans' confidence and discipline, the way they seemed so composed even while under constant pressure. It was a stark reminder of how much he could learn from them. Their courage seemed infectious, a sense of calm and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The final approach toward the Killian installation seemed to stretch endlessly, each mile bringing more fire and greater risk. The terrain was rough, and the enemy's resistance showed no signs of letting up. Despite the rover's advanced systems, Savin could still feel the weight of every decision they made. His hands remained steady as they fought their way toward their goal, their breaths quick and adrenaline high. Every round loaded felt like another step toward victory, though the goal still felt distant. With the enemy's presence pressing down on them, the only certainty came from their ability to trust each other. They were a team, and their chances lay in their ability to keep moving, to stay focused, and to rely on each other until the mission was complete. The journey toward the Killian installation became a chaotic and dangerous race as enemy fire grew heavier. Carlos, the human soldier manning the turret, continued to fire with practiced ease, his movements quick and efficient even under pressure. His focus was unbroken as he kept his eyes on the horizon and fired in controlled bursts at targets that moved with unpredictable patterns. Samantha, on the other hand, remained vigilant at the wheel, expertly maneuvering the rover through the rough and uneven lunar terrain. Her hands gripped the controls with unyielding determination, ensuring they could keep up their speed without losing control, while dodging craters and scattered debris. The task at hand felt grueling, especially for Savin, who had to maintain his role as the loader of ammunition under the intense pressure of the firefight. His hands moved with steady precision, placing rounds into the gun as quickly as possible, knowing that any hesitation could cost them their survival. While the gunfire and explosions roared around them, Savin found himself drawn to the small victories of completing each task without error. Every round loaded and ready felt like a small step toward their goal, even as the sound of missiles, kinetic bursts, and enemy fire continued to fill the air. It was a reminder that the success of this mission would depend on each of them performing their role with discipline and focus. Despite their skills and advanced technology, The stress of the situation threatened to overwhelm Savin. The low gravity of the moon's surface, combined with the unpredictability of enemy fire, left him in a constant state of hyper-awareness. His body felt the strain of being pressed into action for too long, his core muscles aching from the effort. Every movement in the cockpit of the rover and every shift of his focus toward the next round was another act of survival, a constant reminder of the fragile balance between life and death. His mind wandered briefly, imagining how much easier this would be if they had more support or additional technology. Yet, his focus was on the here and now, every motion honed by the urgency of the mission. The vehicle itself, though equipped with advanced countermeasures and a sturdy build, was far from immune. Each incoming missile or burst of fire tested its defenses, the hum of the anti-missile systems active and alive as they engaged threats midair. Savin could feel the vibrations of the rover as the countermeasure systems did their job, their success giving him hope that they could make it to their destination. There were moments when explosions sounded far too close, the tremor of impact threatening to rattle his confidence, but they pressed on, knowing that failure would mean death. The weapon systems, coupled with the human soldier's skill, created a coordinated effort that felt almost seamless, even as the odds remained impossibly stacked against them. The space between the fire and their destination grew shorter with each passing moment, but the danger never ceased. Savin could feel the weight of exhaustion as his body struggled to maintain its rhythm, but he refused to stop. He knew that losing focus now would be the end. Every part of his attention was trained on loading the rounds, helping ensure that Carlos could maintain his fire, while Samantha kept their vehicle on course. Their survival was tied to these simple but critical roles, and they could not afford to fail. Their confidence came from the unspoken understanding of teamwork, a shared belief that, as long as they trusted each other and stayed focused, they could make it through. The entire ride felt like a blur of motion and sound, with each gunshot, burst of fire, and distant explosion marking the journey. The Killian installation loomed in the distance, its defenses visible now and growing larger with every mile they closed in. Savin tried to maintain hope as they pressed forward, the knowledge that they were getting closer a small comfort amidst the chaos. Despite the uncertainty of the mission and the overwhelming odds, they had one another, their bond forged through necessity and trust. That unity, combined with their skill and determination, would be their greatest weapon as they fought to complete their mission and gain control of the installation. The sudden tension in the air was palpable as the group advanced toward their destination. Everything about the situation felt fragile. Every burst of fire, every round fired by Carlos, and every step they took in the rover seemed a delicate balance between survival and disaster. The planetary defense complex loomed larger now, its structures becoming more defined with each passing moment. The base could be a potential threat, armed with powerful weapons and defenses, and the group had to be cautious. The idea of snipers hiding out in the dark, rocky craters, or Killian forces ambushing them at any moment added an extra layer of pressure. It was a stark reminder of just how fragile their advantage was, even with their advanced technology. The rover itself was proving to be both a blessing and a curse. Its armored hull and anti-missile capabilities gave them the edge, but every time enemy fire struck nearby, the vibrations and sound made it clear that they were still vulnerable. Samantha, the human soldier at the wheel, showed an impressive command of the vehicle as she steered them through treacherous terrain while under enemy fire. Her skill kept them moving despite the chaos, while Carlos remained focused on manning the turret and firing in controlled bursts at targets. They moved as a coordinated unit, each one taking on their respective roles. But even so, it felt as though the danger was closing in with every passing second. The mental strain was beginning to show. Savin, in particular, found his focus wavering as the strain of his role as loader caught up to him. His hands moved mechanically, but his thoughts began to dwell on what would happen if they failed. The mission felt impossible at times, a race against time with enemies firing from all angles. Every time his hands found another round to load, his mind would return to the bigger picture. What would happen if they couldn't stop the defense complex from activating or gain control? His anxiety, amplified by the lack of direct communication and the chaos of combat, made each second feel like an eternity. Carlos's sudden movement startled them. His hands slipped from the turret as he crumpled under his own weight, and his body slumped backward into the hatch. Panic gripped the group as they scrambled to understand what had happened. Samantha's voice cut through the comms, calling Carlos's name urgently, but there was no response. The sight of blood pooling at the edges of his helmet and the sight of his body limp sent waves of terror through the crew. Savin's heart pounded as he struggled to make sense of the situation while continuing to focus on his role. The fight wasn't over, but now they had to contend with saving Carlos, whose injury placed them in even more jeopardy. The desperate search to save Carlos became a new priority, even as the mission itself remained on the line. They had come so far, fighting through the lunar terrain, maneuvering against enemy fire, and relying on their skills and technology to ensure they made it to the complex. Now, they were forced to confront the sudden reality of losing one of their strongest members. The human's composure, even under fire, had always inspired some degree of confidence in Savin. However, seeing Carlos incapacitated was a sobering reminder that no amount of skill or preparation could guarantee their survival. Each move forward brought with it new risks, but the team knew that hesitation would only make the situation worse. Their survival now depended on speed, ingenuity, and coordination, three things that felt harder to maintain with every heartbeat. The group pushed forward, fully aware that time was slipping through their fingers with every passing moment. Their mission was clear, but the obstacles in their way were mounting with each passing second. The base was heavily defended, and the odds were not in their favor, yet there was no choice but to keep moving. The sounds of distant fire and the hiss of rounds striking against the rover's hull were a constant reminder of just how vulnerable they remained. Every maneuver Samantha made behind the wheel was calculated, skimming over craters and rocky terrain to avoid additional fire and keep them from becoming an easy target. Samantha remained focused on driving the rover, her hands steady as she steered them through the landscape toward the installation. Carlos continued his role on the turret, firing bursts as necessary to suppress the enemy and allow the vehicle to maintain a steady path forward. Even so, tension gripped the team as they pressed on, uncertain if they would meet enemy reinforcements or unforeseen traps. The cold, mechanical sounds of firing mixed with the low rumble of the rover's engines created a disorienting soundtrack as they traveled. Despite the precision of their actions, fear lingered just beneath the surface. Fear of failure, fear of enemy response, and fear of death. Savin, in his role as a loader, struggled to maintain his focus. His hands worked mechanically, grabbing ammo and preparing it for the main gun as their progress continued, but his mind remained partially detached. The sheer weight of responsibility felt daunting. Failure was not an option, especially with so much riding on the mission's success. His fingers trembled slightly with exhaustion as he loaded round after round into place, knowing that the success of their survival would depend on his ability to stay focused. The pressure of time, combined with the adrenaline coursing through his body, made every moment feel sharper, more intense, and harder to endure. Suddenly, the vehicle jolted under the strain of an unexpected burst of fire. Samantha had to fight the controls to steady the rover, forcing it to maintain its speed and continue the approach toward the defense complex. Carlos was struggling, too. His composure had begun to falter in the midst of the chaos. The team was used to his confidence and discipline under pressure, but this sudden attack tested their resolve. Every round fired at the enemy felt like a desperate gamble, each one a calculated risk meant to suppress, slow, or disable their enemies. It became clear that Carlos was placing his faith in their ability to adapt and trust the technology at their disposal. Despite everything, they pressed on with a grim determination. The defense complex loomed larger and larger as they closed the gap, its weapons and structures coming into sharper view. The team knew this would be their final opportunity to strike, to neutralize its ability to retaliate, and to seize control of the key systems. However, they also knew the cost would be steep. The possibility of failure loomed over them, and as they crested the final ridge, it felt as if the weight of that failure pressed heavily on their shoulders. The planetary defense systems were powerful, and the enemy knew how to wield them. The team could not afford to hesitate. Despite the chaos and the fear, they would press on, knowing that every second mattered and every burst of fire was a step closer to the outcome they desperately needed. As they neared the base, the familiar sense of tension and desperation was amplified. The group kept their focus, knowing that any misstep now would likely cost them their lives. The landscape around them grew rougher, with cratered valleys and exposed ridges creating obstacles that they had to navigate carefully. The rover itself struggled against the terrain, taking hits and sustaining damage as they advanced. Each member of the team was acutely aware of their individual roles, their own limitations, and the importance of trusting one another. Their survival depended on that trust, on communication, and on their combined skill and strength. As they closed the gap with the enemy installation, they knew that they were running out of time, but also that they had come too far to fail now. Carlos had been firing steadily from the turret, his hands moving with practiced precision as he suppressed enemy fire. His role was critical, offering the team the cover they needed as they continued their approach toward the base. However, amidst this calm but dangerous rhythm, a sudden, sharp movement broke through the silence of their comms. It came without warning, a spasm that jolted through Carlos's body, and in an instant, his head snapped backward. His hands slipped off the controls, and his entire form crumpled. The vehicle's vibrations made his fall even more pronounced, sending a wave of panic through Savin as he processed the sudden change. The moment Carlos collapsed, Samantha's voice broke through the comms in sharp, urgent tones, calling his name. The sound of her voice was filled with anxiety, sharp and quick, a clear signal that this was no ordinary malfunction. Savin's heart dropped as he realized that Carlos was unresponsive. His eyes darted toward the hatch to see what had happened. There was a stark, horrifying sight, blood bubbling at the cracked edges of Carlos's helmet, the evidence of a gunshot or shrapnel piercing through. The sudden realization that Carlos had been hit and exposed to the vacuum brought a wave of fear and helplessness crashing over Savin. Desperate, Savin scrambled over to Carlos's collapsed body, his hands reaching out to assess the damage. The bullet hole was clear, a hole through the helmet that would have left Carlos exposed to the cold, airless void. His breaths came quickly, his mind racing as he tried to think of a way to save the human. Every action felt panicked, a chaotic attempt to find some solution in a moment of high stress. The team knew that time was running out. The vacuum offered no reprieve, and their desperate hope was that quick action could save Carlos, or at least ensure his body did not succumb completely to the unforgiving environment. Samantha was pulling the vehicle closer, her hands white-knuckled as she kept the rover steady under fire. She could not slow down, even as worry consumed her, because every moment spent exposed was another moment that risked their survival. The hum of the engines and the sound of gunfire felt deafening, and yet, amidst it all, the fear of losing Carlos lingered. Savin's voice crackled in his comms as he tried to maintain control of his emotions, but his voice wavered with every word. His mind kept returning to that single bullet, the cold, final hole, and the sight of Carlos's body crumpled like a lifeless heap against the bulkhead. The battle continued around them, the fire continuing to pound against the rover's hull as they fought toward their destination. The team members pushed forward, their breaths quick and strained, the sounds of their weapons and the chaos of combat filling their senses. Savin remained kneeling beside Carlos, his body trembling as his thoughts spun. His mind was filled with questions. Was there a way to stabilize him? Could they pull him out, patch his suit, or slow his body's exposure long enough to give them a fighting chance? Each possibility seemed slim, and yet, the desperate need to act drove them forward. Carlos had always shown discipline, calm confidence, and trust in their mission, and now, Savin couldn't shake the sense that his failure to save his comrade would haunt him. The team knew their mission had taken a sharp, devastating turn. Carlos's collapse represented more than just a loss of a team member. It represented a gap in their coordination, a breakdown in the firepower they had relied on to stay alive. Samantha's voice came again, sharp, focused and resolute, as she continued driving the rover, weaving through craters and gunfire. Despite their fear, they pressed forward. The tides of battle would not wait for their recovery. The base loomed ahead. Their mission still required their full attention, and as much as they wanted to stop to mourn or plan, survival required they push forward. Every step felt heavier now, but the team's survival instincts kept them in motion, their minds unwilling to stop, even as they felt the weight of loss creeping in.